So, yes, it turns out psychology can be a science if we treat it as such. So, today I'm going to discuss a little bit about an extremely unoriginal question of can psychology be a science? Something that has been debated for ages, arguably with not entirely satisfactory results, and something that I myself have investigated in depth. And in fact, my thesis in psychology is titled "The Evolution of Psychology as a Science?" question mark. And one of my books based on the thesis published discusses this in depth. And so this is something that has been debated over and over. And let me sum up a little bit what the situation has been so far, and some new insights that do seem to offer us the opportunity for a brighter future in the field. But it's a little bit still an ongoing debate. So now the thing is, can psychology be a science is a complicated question, because in itself psychology is somehow weird as a science, even if you treat it as such. And I'd say one of the easiest way to put it is that normally in a science, let's say if you're doing engineering or physics or biology or whatever it is, in fact, one of the definition of science, when by Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, is that the good thing about science is that it's true regardless of what your beliefs are and what your feelings are. And ordinarily this is exactly what we want. So if you're doing physics, if you're doing biology, if you're asking a question in this field, so let's say we want to ask each other whether or not a certain bridge built in a certain way is going to be able to withstand a certain amount of weight on it. That's an important practical question, and we want an answer which is objectively true. We don't want an answer which is in any way related to what my beliefs are, what my feelings are about this bridge. Is just based on what the calculations are, on what let us know whether or not the bridge is solid enough to withstand a certain pain or not. That's all we're interested for. So in the sense, there the deGrasse Tyson's statement that science is that which is independent of what your beliefs and feelings are about that, about something, is kind of true for the most part. And that's a positive thing. It's a very powerful tool that allows us to get outside our heads and be more functional in having control over the world around us, precisely because we are not stuck into our beliefs and feelings, and we can look beyond that. Now the problem with psychology is that it's kind of hard to do that, because in psychology our beliefs, our feelings, our emotions, our perception, everything that is inside our head is what we are studying. So we cannot, it's kind of hard to do, and we have tried to do this attempt of ignoring what's inside our head to do psychology, but it just kind of really doesn't work. So because of this problem, this inconsistency, already Immanuel Kant, for instance, one of the greatest philosophers of the 17th century, has sentenced, no matter how much we learn more about everything, in principle, psychology cannot be a science. It's structurally impossible for psychology to be a science because it doesn't have to study. Kant was a dualist, so he distinguishes between the matter and the mind, basically, and he believed that science can study the matter, and since psychology doesn't study matter, it studies the mind, it can't be a science. And the 19th century has been basically various attempts, from Helmholtz to Donders to a lot of Fox, to a lot of researchers, philosophers, oftentimes physiologists, doctors, trying to prove Kant wrong and trying to show that no, we can actually do objective measuration in psychology with again, not entirely satisfactory results. Let's put it in that way. And that went on until the official birth date of psychology, which is in Leipzig, 79 in Leipzig, with Wilhelm Wundt, who opened the first official laboratory of experimental psychology. So it's the first official place where you were doing psychology as a science, as a research, as an experiment, as opposed to just being a philosopher, or even more like in the case of Helmut Londers and people like that, who were doing experiments in psychology, but they were physiologists. They were not officially psychologists. So that's kind of we keep it as this official birthday of psychology. And yet again, things weren't really all that well fixed. Wundt did things which he thought was science, and other people weren't all that convinced about it. And then we got all sorts of things. We got Piaget, we got Freud, we got all sorts of different theories, different schools of psychology, and it did seem pretty much confusing. William James wrote a very important book about the principles of psychology, kind of imitating the Principia of Newton, the foundational book of physics, which laid down the grounds of the basic rules of the whole field, let's put it that way. And James did try to do something similar for psychology, but failed miserably, in his own words. After he spent years writing that book, then he, in his letters, we know that he had commentaries about how nobody is disgusted by that book as much as he is. And there are only two things that you can conclude from the book. One, there is no such thing as science or psychology, and two, William James is an incompetent. So not very positive as a way, to the point that in the next great school of psychology, which was from John Watson, and was called behaviorism, attempted actually, I'd call it an etymological revolution, because in this desperation, what Watson did was basically completely change the meaning of the word of the field. So it was psychology. It's the study of the mind, and concluding that studying the mind is difficult, and we really don't want to do that. He basically kicked off the whole etymology of the word, which is the study of the psyche, psychology, study of the psyche, study of the mind. I say, no, like hell we're doing that. We are not studying the mind, we are not studying thought, we are not studying emotions. All psychology can study is behavior, hence behaviorism. So purely external observation, mostly on animals, of what an animal does in a certain setting, how it learns, how it presses a lever and then it gets a treat, and then it repeats pressing the lever, these sort of experiments. And this was felt like very cool at that time, because it's now psychology is a science, because we're studying behavior and we are no longer studying the mind, which is weird. How we do that, we don't know, so we just ignore it. Basically, that was the answer of the behaviorist in a way, which was quite successful in a way, in its own terms. It's been dominating the field for almost 5 decades, basically. And then we learned that there are some other things that we could do and probably should be doing. And however, the problems basically have not been fixed. And for more information about the whole history of psychology and how it developed and what exactly the problems are, my book pretty much it discusses this. So that's a good way to get more information. But in short, let's just mention very briefly a few issues which have been occurring, which are some of the main ones, and that is recently emerged from the last 15-20 years, a systematic problem we have in psychology. To be fair, not only in psychology. This has been emerged in a lot of other fields, including hard sciences like biology and physics. So the problem is not really the way psychology works. It's more of a problem of how academia and university works. But That's been called the so-called replication crisis. So it has been found that again, it's not just psychology, but I'm going to discuss psychology because that's the subject. So in psychology, it turns out that most of the studies cannot be replicated. So if another group of researchers tries to do the same experiment, because we do experiments in psychology, we publish experiments in psychology, we publish studies in psychology, but one of the basic tenets of science is that it's replicable. So if, say, I'm doing an experiment in physics and Newton goes there and says, oh, this is how gravity works, and if something falls, it falls in 3 seconds, and if I do my experiment in my room and I try to dip something and instead of 3 seconds it falls in 6 seconds, it's not replicable. We don't consider it science. Again, take the example of the bridge before. If say I make my calculation of that yes, the bridge will be able to withstand a certain the weight of a certain amount of cars and trucks on it, and somebody else does the same experiment and it turns out that no, the way can't withstand that weight, it's useless. We built a bridge, but we don't really know whether or not we can let cars go onto it or not. So if replicability is one of the basic tenets of science, that's like one of the key aspects of what we want in science. And so as it turned out, when these systematic attempts at replication has been carried out in many fields, including psychology, the results have been pretty much terrible, I dare to say. So in psychology, we had at less than half, and in some cases, just barely over 30% of studies do replicate. So what this shows is that the majority of studies in psychology are just basically something that's they could be a fraud in itself, which has happened, and we have evidence it has happened in some cases, but in most other cases, some things has been done to create a certain result, which is not technically a fraud. It's called we call it QPR, which is an acronym for questionable research practices. Sorry, QRP, questionable research practices, which is things that researchers normally do, which are not considered fraud. It's like they're not making up things, but you are kind of playing with the data in some ways which you're technically not supposed to, and you do some things that everybody else does, but probably are not good, but who cares? And so when we've done these study on the replicability of psychology, we found out that the majority of studies published in psychology works like this. So it's you have a result which is only mainly due to bad practices, and it turns out that most of the time, if somebody else tries to do the experiment again, they just found something entirely different. So this would suggest that psychology is not a science. If I do an experiment, you do the same experiment, I find one thing, you find something entirely different, we haven't found nothing. So yes, I can be super popular, I can sell best-selling books, I can be interviewed by BBC and everywhere, I can be a super famous psychologist, the next Freud, I'll be giving speeches, but I'm not doing science because it's just not something that can't be replicated. It's just something that it's either a statistical fluke or a direct fraud or whatever it is. It's just about, it's precisely what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying. Science should not be about your beliefs and your feelings, and that's entirely what it is. I make feel people good about what I'm saying, and now they're liking it, I'm being popular, I'm making money, I'm selling best-selling books, and that's it. That's not science, that's marketing. And so as it turns out, a lot of psychology is purely marketing. You can't really, again, this is just part of the problems that we have in psychology, but overall it's this is a good summary. Okay, can you replicate or not? This is a very good indication of whether or not something is well done, it's solid. And it turns out that as it is right now, most of psychology studies, experiment, published research can't be replicated. It's also a problem because things that can be replicated oftentimes are are not good either, because and I think these are things I discuss in the book. We have a lot of problems with false consciousness theories in psychology. So basically, where you are, you have this theory that you're justified to ignore the data that you have, because anyway, people don't know themselves, and therefore you as the psychology can make up whether they're happy, whether they're depressed, whether they're sad, and so on. So you can basically ignore the data because you are too smart to have to listen at these uneducated folks. And we have a problem with tautology. So a lot of research which has been replicated a lot. So for instance, the fact that I live in Finland, so I always say, oh, you live in Finland, it's the happiest country in the world, which is a very well replicated finding, but it's technically not a finding. It's just something that has kind of been made up by setting up the research in a way that necessarily it will conclude that Finland is the happiest country in the world. And if you actually ask the people, it's kind of not. But and again, who cares about it, what people think, whether or not they're happy or not? I'm a psychologist, so I'm cooler than you, so I can tell you if you are happy and if you're not. So whatever. So again, replicability is not the only thing that matters in psychology, but it is a big deal. So this fact that most studies in psychology do not replicate is in itself, on its own, like a major bummer, and it really questions the reliability of the field, because particularly for someone who is not in the field and wants to get informed about the field, it's virtually impossible to know whether or not when you're looking at the research, you can tell whether this research is science or not. And this complicates things a lot, because it makes the whole thing kind of useless, because what you'll have to do, the whole point of science is that it creates a system of shareable knowledge. Nobody stops you from doing the exact same kind of research and experiments Isaac Newton did, and conclude the same things and come out with the law of gravitation on your own, if you're smart enough, which most of us aren't. But anyway, in principle you can do that, okay? But the nice thing about science is that you don't have to do that, because Newton did it already. And so there is actually this quote about Newton on why was he able to look up farther than others, because he was standing on the shoulder of giants. So because other people have done the foundational work before him, he was able to just take a peek beyond where nobody else have seen anything before, and so there is this accumulation, not just accumulation of knowledge, but this spreading of knowledge outside of a single brain. So it's not like I have to hold all the knowledge, I have to do all the experiments, I have to figure out everything on my own, which again is a kind of new thing. We are not used to this, because most people have evolved in a setting where there was no writing, there was no internet for sure. So whatever you learn, you have to learn it on your own and then pass it down to maybe your disciple, and that's it. Nowadays we don't have to do that. So the usefulness of science is that I can go and on PubMed, on Google Scholar, or whatever search engine you're using for science, and search whatever topic of interest, and I find tons of research done by other people who will enlighten me about things that if I had to learn on my own, it will take months and months of work. In one day, I can just go through the research, read the papers, see the abstracts, see the conclusions, see the methods, and so on, and I'll gain basically all the knowledge that they had accumulated in these months. So it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly effective. But if I have no clue which part of these published papers makes any sense, which part of it is scientific to begin with, which part is just basically junk, then it's kind of useless, because in order to know, I will have to go in detail to see, okay, is this been ever replicated? Has this experiment been done in a scientific way to begin with, and so on. And basically I kind of have to redo, if not all the work, I still have to redo a lot of this work. And what I'd expect from a scientist will be to, when you publish the paper, you have done this work. That's what, in my mind, that's what making science means. You have done this work and you are publishing this paper showing this is how I've done this work, this is what I found. If I don't know that you have done that, it becomes kind of useless. Even if you specifically have done that work well, it's still kind of useless, because if most people don't, I don't know if you happen to be one of the most people. So I still have to reanalyze, redo the work, and it becomes useless again. So that's kind of sad state psychology is in. And in fact, Smaldino and McElroth have suggested in 2016 that they have done this both empirical analysis and computer simulations of how research is conducted in these days, and they have found out, suggested this very powerful argument that bad research doesn't just happen, it's naturally selected for. So it's not that the problems we're having in psychology, and again also in other fields, it's not that we are doing research right, but science is hard, you can never know, there's a lot of things to consider, result problems, mistakes, junk, findings will happen even if we're trying our best. No, they suggested that and demonstrated through computer simulations that that's most likely what is going to happen is, given the way the academia system is set right now, rewarding high publication, rewarding certain type of findings. Again, you can see in the book which type of findings are rewarded more than others. Rewarding certain types of study, certain types of settings, certain types of putting up the citations and so on. If we do science in that way, they argue that it's not that occasional junk will happen. It's the necessary conclusion of the way we are doing science right now. The necessary conclusion is that most of it is junk, and that's exactly what we have. Most of studies in psychology do not replicate one. That's not the only reason a lot of psychology studies are junk, but that's a big one. So, and the thing is, if you do psychology the way we are currently doing psychology, it's not that, bad science will occur. It's unavoidable that bad science, or rather, it's not science, so it's unavoidable that junk results will occur. Now, so there is this recent work which has tried to do something revolutionary and has tried to see, hey, what happens if we actually do psychology as a science? And again, all the things I'm saying, it's not that there are new things. It's not mainstream in a way. When you get a degree in psychology, you still study all the junk. You go through all the mainstream great psychologies and some newer one which are famous, and you never assess whether or not they make sense or not. You have a poor assessment of the evidence. You have a poor discussion about meta-science, which is the field which has emerged in order to discuss and fix all these problems. It's something that's kind of poorly discussed on. It's true that researchers are tendentially aware of this problem, and it's kind of difficult to solve because, again, the system rewards doing things the system rewards publishing junk. So this is another paper about going from excellence to nonsense, and discussing how the academic reward systems specifically give incentives for researchers to publish junk. They reward poor methodology, they reward the QRPs, they reward sometimes outright fraud. Although direct fraud happens, but again, it's not the main thing. It's just that there is all sort of things which we know are there, we know they happen, we know everybody's doing them, and we know that they lead to basically junk science, and that's what's going on. So what I tried is 2022, this revolutionary thing of what happens if we actually do science in psychology. So They have taken into account all these things I'm telling you about, all these things that people studying meta science have been telling for decades about why we should not doing science why we should not doing psychology in these ways, how we should not use certain types of very small samples, which is the norm, how we should do pre-registration of studies, because one of the major problem is that the publishers tend to publish only data which find an effect, which is stupid, because you also want to, if something does not have an effect, you want to know it. So if you make 100 studies about something and only one of the studies finds an effect, and you publish only that one, and you will say, oh, see, published research shows that these things is effective, when in reality it's definitely not. So that's one of the other things we do. So pre-registration is a one thing, for instance, where you pre-register the study aims and research and methodology is decided before you take in the data, and then you just have to publish the data, whatever it is. You can just change it afterwards in order to get more publishing, more citations. So this is, again, one of simple things that has been suggested to fix the problems we're having in psychology. So in short, what they did is this revolutionary attempt of, hey, how about we try to do experiments in psychology, doing the things which psychologists have been telling for decades are the ways in which we should make psychology, so it is a science. And so what happens with this revolutionary approach is that they found that the replication rates of these studies goes from less than half or barely over 30%, and is most on the replication studies in psychology too, and it skyrockets to almost 90%. I'm happy. I'm very happy about this. So this is good news. If we do psychology as a science, we actually can replicate our findings, and there is good indication that psychology can be a science. Go figure. We can actually measure things, we can make experiments, we can replicate the experiments, so we can create, in principle, a solid, evidence-based ground for research in psychology. There is, in principle, there is no real reason to suggest nowadays that it's something that can't be done. We can, and this is one of the more evidence that, in principle, we totally can. And the question is, are we going to? Because again, the problem is not that, and this is a very nice experiment. I really liked seeing this experiment, because until now it's kind of been theoretical, with people have been suggesting that we should do psychology in a certain way and assuming that then it will be better. And this is an experiment that has tried to see if that is true, and it turns out it is true. So this is exciting. But so it is confirmation, but it's confirmation of something that has been told and argued for decades. In fact, already in 1953, Bevan coined the term Wuzel effect, which is where psychologists use citation as evidence. So they just cite one paper for one from another, and this creates evidence of something. Oh, there is 100 mentions in scientific research of this finding, so 100 psychologists are saying this, and then you just try to track it back, and it's always based on nothing. It's just based on, oh, this psychologist said so, and the other one was, oh, but that other psychology also said so, and so there is this circularity of, oh, he says so as well, and he says I'm saying that, so this is evidence, when it's just just repetitions of what your opinions are. So and this is called the Wuzel effect, and this has been the term that has been coined already in 1953. So it's not like we don't know all these problems we're having in psychology. It's not like we don't know how to fix them. And again, this experiment I really liked, about showing that if we do psychology right, we do have very high rates of replication, which is like, it's awesome. It's like what we have been trying to find out since Kant, basically. The problem is this going to change anything? And unfortunately, I'm not very convinced it is, because in principle, again, it's a nice confirmation. It's not like anything really new has been discovered, because no, it is a new discovery, but it's something that we have been thinking for a long time. So I don't know. Let's see if this helps to change the way psychology is done. But the good news is that psychology, I do think this is strong confirmation that psychology can indeed be a science if done right. But again, the problem is that it is exactly been the problem with psychologists, that we are not doing it right, and we are accepting not doing it right, and we are continuing not doing it right, despite the evidence being overwhelming that we are not doing it right, all of which I did discuss in the book. So let's see what happens. But again, I wanted to share this because I'm very excited about the fact that in fact psychology can be a science, even though right now it isn't. But if we steer things in the right direction, maybe it could eventually become one.